Welcome to Concepts in Ethnography. In this session, let's talk about French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu and his concept of habitus. A habitus can be loosely compared to a house. It contains the activities of the people inside it. The house follows the acceptable rules of building for the population it serves: room arrangement, windows, doors, and so on. As a structure, however, a house serves no purpose of its own. It is constitutive of a particular environment. Because the habitus reflects the general belief system of the people who dwell in it, we can say it reflects the collective acceptable practices of the people it exists to serve. Also, the type of house you dwell in is often some indicator of your class status, your culture, or your standing within your community. Habitus creates the environment within which we make choices about how we want to live and what we want our future to look like. You wouldn't expect someone to live in an igloo in Florida. The climate and culture of the two groups of people are too diverse for that to happen. But within Florida, the type of home you live in says something about your adherence to what your community deems agreeable. Unlike a house, however, Bourdieu claims a habitus is more of an invisible governing structure, a set of rules, beliefs, and rituals that have become an accepted part of the community. He says that as individuals, we adopt these guidelines without giving it a thought, something like a conductorless orchestra. As an example, think back on the fictional city of Mayberry, North Carolina. Andy Taylor is the sheriff, Barney Fife is his deputy, and together they enforce the rules of the habitus of Mayberry. More than likely, if you lived in Mayberry, you would have a middle-income profession, Judeo-Christian mindset, attend church on Sunday, live conservatively, marry someone from within your community, and live out your life within its borders. These were the values that were held collectively by the members of Mayberry, not only as part of their community identity, but as the identity that was typical of America at that point in history. But what might have happened if a Jewish family from New York City moved to Mayberry? They would have the customs, religious practices, political views, food preferences, and even clothing that would be expected in a Jewish community in New York City. However, Mayberry was not equipped to accommodate them. Mayberry and its inhabitants would either have to agree to make the changes necessary to accept Jewish families, or make their life so uncomfortable that they would have to move. Their other option would be to become more like Andy and Barney. This leads us to Clifford Geertz, the Princeton anthropologist who wrote about something called thick description, or the interpretation of personal meaning to the actions of a habitus. Within the social group are its members, its people. The study of these members, their gestures, rituals, customs, and beliefs are at the root of what ethnographic research hopes to interpret. The simple act of observation may reveal what actions are parts of a ritual or custom, but it doesn't reveal the deeper nature of why that ritual or custom occurs, or the meaning it holds for individual participants. The role of the ethnographer, then, is to search for the meanings that are attached to actions, as the same actions or artifacts can have very different interpretations depending on the accepted belief system of its users, the social legacy they acquire from the group, and their learned behavior. For example, let's assume a character named Zydeco was born and raised on the planet Mango.
I come from the planet Mango. I have been sent by my leader to study your customs and rituals, and how you use your resources. My mission is to come to your planet and live among you while I do my research. I will look like one of you and be placed in one of your communities. This will be no problem, as I have spent many of your Earth years in study and you are simple beings to copy.
On Mango, it is customary to hold up one's middle finger as a gesture of greeting. Upon Zydeco's arrival in Mayberry, he encounters the first person he meets and tries his best to appear to fit in. He enthusiastically greets Helen, a newly widowed woman with her small child, which apparently doesn't generate the return gesture of greeting he was looking for. In fact, Helen covers her child's eyes, screams, and runs in the opposite direction, pulling her young one behind her. As a result of this encounter, Zydeco was removed and reassigned to a place where he seemed to be a much better fit for the population. According to Geertz, the essential vocation of interpretive anthropology is not to answer our deepest questions, but to make available to us answers that others, guarding other sheep in other valleys, have given, and thus to include them in the consultable record of what was said. Gathering this interpretation from participants can happen by several methods, one of which is narrative, reflected in the work of Gretchen Chesley Lang. Lang's work focused on the Dakota tribe and how they described the emergence of diabetes as a disease in their community. Their thick descriptions of their experience included their own personal history, along with a system of belief that suggested diabetes was brought on them because they angered the spirits. Their stories also included an intermingling of white man's medicine, which suggested dietary changes in treatment. Lang suggests that anthropologists, in their role as ethnographers, must necessarily attempt to ground such accounts and the occasion of their telling, not only in the context of interview or conversation, but with consideration to the social, cultural, and historical context for narrative statements. Let's relate Lang's principles of narration back to Helen of Mayberry, who was traumatized to the point of hysterics at the encounter with Zydeco. She ran with her son directly to the home of the pastor and his wife. After all, this was a God-fearing community, and where better for a widow to seek consolation? Helen calmed down in the presence of the older woman and related her story. The pastor's wife listened to Helen, but as someone who lived in the community all her life, she had never experienced anything like Helen was describing. She knew Helen was having a tough time adjusting to life after the death of her husband, having to raise a child alone and all. But it was up to the pastor's wife to determine if what Helen was telling her was true, based on her own observations of life as a member of the community. For her part, Helen was allowing her experience to become larger than life. She may have misstated Zydeco's size and the expression on his face, as she was just so shocked by the gesture. It's also possible that her own security as a newly single woman was threatened, and this event is her statement of activism for the community to take a more proactive role in protecting women and children. In listening to Helen's narrative about the event, the pastor's wife believes this is an isolated incident and ultimately asks her husband to walk Helen and her son home, locking her doors for the first time ever behind them. As ethnographers, it is important to realize we are observing human behavior, that of actions and customs developed over time through a lens that includes very personal meaning for those being observed. The actions, stories, and beliefs are not only part of the personal history of the participants, it's part of the collective history of the social setting to which they belong. Ethnographers don't study a community, they observe the people within the community. As modern life crumbles the barriers between groups of people, ethnographers will be challenged in finding what continues to make us different from one another, as we will be forged into one global community.
I'm Dr. Lawrence Driscoll, PhD, and I specialize in a subfield of anthro-Heinzology, which allows me to explore the human-Heinz dynamic. While many regard Heinz ketchup as the perfect culinary accoutrement, some societies have adopted it for their uses. All of these findings have led me to uncover one universal truth. Everybody loves Heinz ketchup.